Gentlemen, to kind of get us fired up and just thinking, let's just get to kind of some of the meat of the thing, because as we're having some conversations in the back, we know some of the challenges. There are challenges and opportunities in each region of the country. Your region certainly presents some. And so as we're trying to target expectations when we're selling calves, could you maybe each specifically highlight what you see as, you can pick one or the other. Hopefully somebody will pick a challenge. But a challenge or a unique opportunity that, because we're in the Northwest, presents itself. And let's not dovetail off of everybody. So Rocky, whatever John says, you can't just copy his. How about that? And so I would say we let the elder statesman on the right, either one of these two men on the right, fire up for us.
What's your question?
So again, what's a unique challenge or a unique opportunity that your customers deal with being in the northwest part of the country? Again, you're close to some major urban centers and all that kind of stuff. You have some packers here locally, but there are certainly some probably challenges associated with your region. How do you see that affecting your business, or maybe the people, more importantly, your customers' business? Is there any sort of regional effect whatsoever, or is it moot?
I think it's become a national market. I don't think there's any regional biases. The market out here is very strong. We've all got winter to go through. We've all got feed costs to deal with. Our feed costs, traditionally, if it's based on the price of corn, is the freight to get corn from the Midwest to here higher. But we have other and so that's why their market sometimes for feeders is just the opposite. The calves are more expensive there. But we also have opportunities for unique feed ingredients here in the Northwest, whether it's French fries, potato byproducts, sweet corn cannery waste. Every region has those byproducts that we can utilize in our rations and get competitive feed costs. So I don't see it as an advantage or a disadvantage.
Okay. John?
I think I agree with what Mike said. I think in the past we have seen the premiums for the Midwest market over our market, but yeah, I think the feeders here in the Northwest have done a good job of using our feedstuffs available and keeping cost of gain down. What I see the biggest challenge, and I guess maybe that's through my lens, for producers, is you're competing with especially for cow-calf. For grazing, you're competing with the less expensive grazing land and forest permits and things like that. There seems to be less and less access to those as years go by. Number two, with the amount of dairy in our area, that has increased property costs. So to run cattle on expensive irrigated ground is a challenge, I would say, for cow-calf people here. And then the other thing I would say is, and maybe it's just a perception, but I feel like in the Midwest, you have many more farmer feeders out there. So at the auction, I think you have maybe to the auctioneer's advantage a little more of an auction, whereas here we sell, whether it be directly or indirectly, to just very few cattle feeders, and so when you get into a high volume season of the year, I think that's probably our biggest challenge to get enough buyers into the room to get fair market on the calves. I'd say that would be our biggest challenge.
Fair enough. Jack? I'm going to let Jack go. He's got kind of a unique perspective, right? Because I would guess there are going to be folks, when it comes to these opportunities and risk, in some ways they're going to be willing to be fairly vocal to you at times, maybe where sometimes they're more hesitant to others.
Well, I'm sure John hears about it also. No one holds back when they get their ticket from the sale barn. But I think the biggest challenge, as John and Mike had talked about, with producers here in the Northwest all competing, the big challenge is, how do you, number one, differentiate your calves from the masses? How do you market the work that you've done, whether it's genetically, through your management? And number two, what can you do to enhance the marketability of those calves and your efficiency? There's a lot of folks that are, for the longest time, wanted a calf January 1st to be able to tell the guy at the coffee shop they weaned an 800-pound calf and didn't care if it took 3 tons of hay into the cow. But I think now that has changed quite a bit, and people are looking more to, through the performance of the cattle, they can still have exceptional weaning weights with less inputs, but it makes it that much more challenging to be able to market those calves if they're coming, like John said, at the peak of the season, if you haven't done a little bit of homework to let some of the folks like you have on your panel here know that cattle are coming. And I guess the other challenge that I see us nationwide, and certainly in the Pacific Northwest, is identification and the willingness for people to use some identification, whether it's an 840 tag, to have those cattle eligible to participate in a variety of process verified programs.
I guess, I mean, you talk about the challenges, obviously. I guess I see a lot of those as an opportunity, specifically the export market. We produce a fair amount of beef in this country, and it's fairly clear that a lot of that beef is going to be consumed outside of our borders, which creates an export opportunity. And, you know, for example, China's not an export right now that we're utilizing, and they have the potential to be what I would consider a top 5 exporter. But in the writing's kind of on the wall that those cattle are not going to have hormones in them. And so I see that as an opportunity if you can utilize an NHTC type opportunity or NHTC type deal where you're not implanting those cattle, you're able to take advantage of that. And what that does, 2 things for the buyer at the next level, and maybe you guys can chime in. What it does, ultimately, you're reducing risk and increasing flexibility. And I think that's where we need to start to think when we take these cattle to the next segment. When they trade hands, we need to make them as flexible and as risk evasive as we can. In other words, if we set them up properly from a vaccination standpoint, we wean them, do a good job weaning them, hold them for 45 days, and get the challenge out of them. But then, in addition to that, create some flexibility from a marketing standpoint for those guys. Just staying on the hormone deal. When those cattle sell hormone-free, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll stay that way. But if the buyer has an opportunity to market those cattle as fats in an NHTC fashion, he can do that. If the market indicates to him that there's more opportunity to implant them and take advantage of the added pounds and performance, he can do that as well. But if you've not set those cattle up at weaning time or set those cattle up prior to, those opportunities don't exist. And that's not, I'm just using the NHTC deal as an example. There's several of those, and we'll get into them later. But
if you have questions or comments, just scream at me and I'll come to you. Until then,
we'd rather hear from you than Chip, to be
no
honest.
doubt about that. But since I have a captive audience, until you ask questions, I'm going to keep asking them because I get to keep picking at the wound. So, Rocky and Jack, you both speak to let's address some of the low-hanging fruit things that we can make better pretty quick. So I'm going to throw it to maybe start with John on this because we all have different perspectives and roles here. But we know it can be difficult at times, even when we all do our job, get the good genetics, you manage them right. Sometimes in any sort of market outlet, it can be a little challenging to always capture the value or the expectations of value. What do you see specifically in your role as some of those areas of low-hanging fruit that folks can do that give them an opportunity, at least position themselves for maybe more value capture than what what your average or normal seller is capturing? I know, that's a big question, and they were going to ask it if I didn't. So.
Yeah. I guess the things in our world, communication is probably, for us in our world is probably the biggest thing. Communication with you as a producer, having a crop of calves to sell. If you're, quite often the phone call is, so Troy, what are my calves going to bring this fall? And, Troy has a crystal ball, and he's seldom wrong. He's instructed at our board meetings, don't ever answer that question. The deal is communication. So, if we can, our biggest challenges are trying to actually, and that's what I feel is the biggest challenge here in the Northwest, having enough actual logistic takers, like there's pins to put them in. There's just not that many folks out there that are going to receive these calves. And so spreading out the harvest a little bit is a desire of ours. We set up them sales, we space them out. You still always kind of seem to bunch up in the middle or end of October a little bit, but so communication saying when you've got a crop of calves to sell, you could say when's the best sale. Well, there's no way of knowing that until it's over, and so you've got we deal with a lot of small producers and some large ones, and so we gear some of our sales to our large producers. And that's kind of the feature, and that's what it's geared at. Sometimes we have small producers that insist they want to tag along, and I think sometimes to their advantage, but we like to gear other sales to those small producers, and we feel like we do them more of a service, and I guess that's really what our business is a customer service program to put your animals in front of the buyers. You can work hard at your genetics. I think that shows up when they cross the scale in the sale ring. There's pounds to be dealt with. There's outcome also. Not just pounds, because sometimes your calves are too big. They're too heavy. They're too fat, and there's not enough outcome to be had for the next guy. And so that can bring your prices down. Dollars per head, maybe at the end of a season, may still be profitable as opposed to generating revenue. It may be profitable, but that's something that I think your genetics and your health program, I think, there is, we don't have a lot of programs, say. I think Rocky with Superior has, when you're watching the Superior or the Western sales, they got lots of letters on the lots about, how they're verified or certified. We don't have too much of that. We do have natural, which we have a couple of local feeders that do participate in the natural program. So if you can get away from hormones and antibiotic use, there can be a premium there, but not always. And so that's a bit of a challenge for us too. Let's see, I'm trying to figure if I'm still answering your question or not, or if I'm just rambling.
No, I mean, I think what you're clearly saying is this is a difficult dynamic, and so could I veer it slightly one other direction? And so you talked about the larger buyers and or larger sellers, smaller sellers. How do you manage the expectations of, let's just say it's not these folks, it's Chip, okay? So Chip, frankly, I'm kind of pathetic. In my case, I'm a little lazy. And maybe there are some of my dots and T's aren't all kind of put in the right place. And I'm marketing a small group of cattle. Yet, clearly, I expect you to make me as much as the folks marketing 200 and 300 head of calves and my 20. How do you manage those expectations? It can't be easy when you're having those conversations sometimes.
Right, I give them Troy's number.
That gets a lot easier.
No, yeah. I guess the service we provide in Toppenish is, I would say that in this season of the year, we have obviously a higher proportion of larger customers. The rest of the year, we're just a little auction yard down the road that handles a lot of small groups of cattle, and it's very necessary for, Mike Parra's got a buyer there. I think Mike Parra buys cattle partner every week of the year in Toppenish, and he'll buy 20 or 30 one week, he might buy 130 the next, and we have a few of those kind of guys around, but we got a lot of sellers like that, and so when you bring your 5 or 10, they come along with the other 25 guys that got 5 or 10, and now there's a group of cattle that buyers can come put together, make a load, whatever the situation is, and so that's and that's why we gear one sale for the small consigners. How do we manage their expectations? Well, honestly, it varies. There are some of those sales for those small consigners we had, and I think I was explaining at the table. We had a Thursday sale, no big strings of calves on a September 27. We sold a set of 6-weight calves for $1.71 a pound. I think there was 4 of them in the ring. To a commercial buyer that bought 100 head of calves that day. We have a big sale on a Tuesday night, and I don't think we got past 168. So it's a little bit. I wish there was more science to our business at times, but it's It's the market's the market. The market is an attitude, and it changes from the beginning of the sale to the end of the sale, let alone from 1 week to the next.
Very good.
No matter if it's a small group or a large group.
Okay.
It's your turn, Mike.
Mike, so I'm going to switch it around. One thing that most of us on the cow-calf side or the seed stock side, frankly, we don't get near enough opportunities to hear somebody in your perspective just to actually tell us what it is you want. What's your expectation in a set of calves? When we make them, they go through John and they come to you. What are the core pieces we need to put in these calves to actually make them successful? Some of us can talk about it. You actually live it.
So the first thing that comes to mind for me is animal health, and genetics is very important. Obviously, we all have genetic biases, but animal health, a lot of the cattle will come through the ring and they'll say they've had all the shots. That means they've had shit to me. I have to start over. If you can verify they've had these shots at this time, and I know that, I can save stress on the animal, I can save cost into the animal, and I can feel comfortable paying more for the animal. Because my biggest challenge coming into my yard from unknown sources, or sometimes even known sources, is animal health, getting them started right, getting them going. Because you can take the best, prettiest set of ball and calves into your yard, and if you don't know how they were handled before, and you don't handle them as if they had nothing, if you make an assumption about all the shots, for example, it can just really knock the health out of the cattle and set you back for months, and you may never make it back. So for us, it's that. And then beyond that, as I say, I'm a relatively small lot. We try to cater to some of the smaller owners, both buying them and custom feeding them. And what the cow-calf man needs to do as much as is possible wherever he goes is get the data about your calves, get the data all the way through kill, how they performed in the feedlot, conversion, rate of gain, cost of gain, but also in the kill plant. How did they grade? You know, where were we kill everything on a grid now. There's nothing killed live in the Northwest. So when I ship cattle, and I sort all the fat cattle leaving the yard, when I ship cattle to the kill plant, 3 days later I get a report card. And that report card has, the grid is based off an average value, and then you have premiums and docks for and against that. And so we try to maximize the premiums, minimize the docks. And the premiums in our area are CAB or Double R Ranch. It's 1s and 2s, it's primes. Docks are overweights, underweights, yield grade 4s, 5s. You just can't afford those things. They'll knock the wind out of your value really quickly. So I have that information. Now, if I bought a load of cattle at John's sale and 12 of them came from one guy and 20 of them came from another guy, they become a lot. And so it's not specific to your animal data unless you've got a USDA tag or some other kind of tag in his ear, where we can have the kill plant actually send us carcass data on an individual. I get the individual data. I can't identify which calf it was unless there's a USDA tag. So as much as you can follow your calf through, whether it's through ownership or just pestering the feedlot and the kill plant about how they did, I'm happy to share that information. I've had customers that I bought from and fed for. One fairly big cow-calf man, I had been buying his cattle. I didn't buy him that, I'd been custom feeding his cattle, and then I did buy them that year. He asked me if he could have the information. I said, absolutely, and he was surprised. He thought that was like super secret stuff. We'd like to share that with you so you can make your decisions on the ranch to make a better calf that does better for you and does better for me.
I will say that's actually pretty remarkable stuff. So a feeder who's that eager to share. So kudos to you on that.
I don't like public speaking, but that's why I'm here. I mean, it's this kind of communication. I'm not the bad guy. You're not the bad guy. The Packer's not the bad guy. We're all part of the chain. We got to figure out how to make it work. Oh, this one too.
Yeah. So one more follow-up to that before we come over here and we start jumping this around is for those folks, they're coming here and they're buying good genetics. They've listened to our Zoetis friends. They're managing these calves right. If somebody is considering feeding some of their own cattle with you, there's some trepidation the first time. What are you going to tell that person who you think is doing it right to help them decide whether that's a right endeavor for them or not?
So we have a break-even calculation. I've got it on my phone. We've got it in the computer in the office. It's not rocket science, and all the feedlots have it. It's a tool to help you make your marketing decision. And had repeat customers who've asked me that question. We run the numbers, and if they're just hitting a home run at the sale yard, and I can run a break even that shows I'm going to lose $100 a head, I'm going to share it with him and recommend that he sells them that way. If there's an opportunity to make money based on those break-even projections, which are only projections, but they're based on the time of year, the quality of cattle, the size of animal, and that's part of the information you need to suss out when you do feed, whether you sell or retain ownership. Conversion, cost of gain. When you're choosing a feedlot, the most important number, well, that's not quite right, but one of the important numbers is 100% dry matter ration cost. If you ask someone what the ration cost is, and they say, you know, it's $100 a ton, but that's on an as delivered to the bunk basis, an as fed basis, a wet basis, it doesn't mean anything. You have to get everything back down to apples, which is 100% dry matter cost. And then we have a set of conversions, and I can blow smoke up my own dress about how good I can make cattle do and pay a little more than I really wanted to when I go to the sale. But I'll give you a range of expectations from really thinking they'll do everything to somewhat conservative, which is where I try to make my choices, because you never know. You know, there's a storm that's going to come through. There's going to be some problems. Sometimes the cattle hit a home run, but I'd rather estimate on the little high side on the cost of gain than the low, and have the customer disappointed or have myself disappointed. So,
Thank you. We got a gentleman who wants to speak to y'all.
I guess my name's John Dixon. I'm from Pomeroy. We're cow-calf, and we background feed our calves and feed other calves on a background basis. And as you talk about weaning them 45 days, and I don't care how even they are or how good you think they are, when you get 45, and in our case I like to get 60 days into the weaning, and you start shipping these calves either on a contract or getting people to start pricing them, look at them, how do you know at times you take the big end. We usually start with the big end and start selling them. Is there a range that's desirable for the feed yard guy or the sales yard guys? And I know it's dependent on the day, the market, the feed cost, but is there a range? Sometimes I think we feed those 6-weight calves out into February and they weigh 8.5, and it doesn't feel like we did ourselves any favors. And I know that market and other things, but when you're a feeder or you're a marketer, I mean, is there a desired weight? And I know John talked about communication. Is there a desirable weight that you guys, everybody says wean them 45 days, but you're going to get calves of different weight and different size, especially the more of them you're going to get. You're going to start getting different sorts on them. Is there a desired weight that's marketable to have them? Because I heard John talk about getting them too big and too fleshy, and you know, you get some of these genetics, these calves will get weighed 8.5. They're in their 60 days, and you know, they'll weigh 8.5, and all of a sudden you're thinking, man, should we have gone somewhere with these guys at 45 days? But I'd like to hear your thoughts on what it looks like from your end when you're getting cattle that are fleshy, been weaned, had all the shots, everything's done right, the potential exists, but maybe is there a desired place where we should have gone earlier, or maybe held that group to go later? Or I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So I guess what I feel like I've been noticing more in recent years is there seems to be a general trend that fat cattle seem to have a peak price, you know, all things remaining somewhat constant. No, you know, there can be some definite things that jump up and really change what the value of cattle are. But if we're just in a normal market, we find the April market seems to be highest. So if you want to sell fat cattle, the highest, you have them dead in April, and so everything works back from that. So if you've got a you know, a 7-weight calf to wean in September, generally speaking, Mike's going to be able to make that 7-weight calf fit the April marketing window. If you come with a 575-pound calf later on in October, generally speaking, if that calf gets locked up in Mike's feedlot, he's not going to come out for harvest till August. July and August, sometimes the lowest points in a normal market. Dog days of summer, there's the least demand. There's, frankly, the most supply, because most people calve in the spring, generally not in December or January. It's February, March, in normal conditions, depending on your grazing situation, your calves are going to weigh 500-600 pounds middle of fall, and that calf is just not going to be ready to be fat and harvested till late summer. You and almost everybody else in the cow-calf world has that. And so therefore we got too much supply for not enough demand. And so when you say, you know, what's the desired weight, we've got guys hunting them summer yearlings come August, September. You know, make a January, February, March, April fat cattle. That's when you're kind of gauging your program. I think, therefore, you know, folks have gone to fall calving. Fall calving is difficult in the Northwest. It costs a lot of money. I don't know that it's more profitable, but you seem to generate more revenue when you sell your calf in the summer. He brings maybe more per pound. He may wean bigger. He hits a better marketing window. Talk about the wean in our world. When you wean your calf, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, you wean your calf in the middle of September, and then you bring him the middle of October with a 30 or 40 day wean. He don't look very good. He looks like he's weaned. He's ready to go to work, whereas he stands and he comes in the ring after all these fancy ball-in calves, and honestly, in our buying pool, we seldom see enough of a premium for folks to feel like they got paid for all that work. The other thing I was going to speak that Mike brought up about, you know, commingling, you know, we have many consigners. Mike sits there and he buys 100. He's probably got at least 10 consigners maybe in that lot. And all 10 of them have given him different vaccinations from 0 to a lot. How does he end up, what is his protocol? I mean, what a challenge for the guy that buys them from soup to nuts. Now, if you've got 300 head of 6-weight steers for sale, I got a hunch that'll be one lot, right? And that's more his world. You know, large Midwestern mountain state producers. Here in the Northwest, we don't have near as many of them. That's more of a challenge. So desired weights, you know, everybody's looking for a 5-6 weight that's weaned on hay with no flesh on him in February and March, ready to go to grass. Everybody's looking for a big calf to feed or a yearling to feed in August, September.
So to further answer that, I think that the one thing you can do that you are in control of is, like John indicated, we like the bigger cattle this time of year because they'll get dead before the bulk of the calves. So what you can do is sort. I mean, I don't care if you have 50 head or 500 head and they're all the same genetics, there's always a sort. So you get the big ones gone when it's time to get them. I've got some repeat custom cattle feeders that are cow-calf men, and they're starting to do this on their own. They'll go through, you know, he's got 1,000 calves. He'll go through and get the top 250, the heaviest calves, get them to me now, and we'll get them dead before the calf rush of fat cattle. And the balance of his cattle, he'll take his longer grow program at home and make them 8 weights. And maybe some of those, you know, the extreme light end of those cattle will hit the folks will start buying grass cattle, you know, in a month and storing them over the winter. There's another niche that is worth a lot of money, the small end. Maybe you want to take the big end now and the small end now, market them, turn the heart of your cattle into your 8 weights, and have an even set of cattle that's easier to buy for the buyer, and you've peeled off the highs and lows of that group and maximize your return.
Rocky, any thoughts on that particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're buying some of those cattle and some of them are home raised. So obviously you're not in control of the ones you're buying, and you got to buy what's available, right? And so from a time of year standpoint, I mean, imagine some of those are going to come in the All-American delivery window, the last 2 weeks of October. Whether you like it or not, that's probably when they come. But you can control the flesh on those cattle, which when we get into those long weaned, sometimes in the yearling market, but at least the long weaned calves that weigh up good around 800, they're gonna land where they're gonna land from a marketing standpoint. But if you can keep the flesh right, in other words, keep them fairly green, to where the guy at the next level has some compensatory opportunity from a average daily gain standpoint, I think that's advantageous. I mean, I sure enough wouldn't hold the cattle back. I just would be careful about ramping them up with too much corn, unless you plan to own them. I mean, do you guys agree?
And it has to do with the cost of that gain at home.
Sure.
I can't afford to hold cattle or push cattle to the market. I got to get them on free pushing. The market's going to be what the market's going to be. To a lesser extent, the man at home, you have to utilize your feed at its best cost. in its best way, but just to simply say hold them, that's not always the answer. You got to do what's most cost effective. But in a general sense, I'd much rather buy that greener kind of calf than a grass-fed calf coming right off the calf.
Jack, I'm going to switch gears unless somebody's got a hand up for me. Because in your role, there are conversations that you're going to be mired in that some of the rest of us don't deal with as much. And Mike brought up something earlier that kind of spoke to me. To get some of that carcass information back, if you have EIDs, it's a much easier thing to do, right? For those who don't have EIDs, it gets quite a bit more complicated and they lose more carcasses. EIDs then immediately land back into something you mentioned earlier, Jack, in terms of the concept of traceability. So I'm going to set this up. I think way too often we think about traceability as an accountability effort, meaning we're going to hold you accountable for what you did. There's certainly some of that. But I think we can look at traceability as an empowerment play, meaning can we potentially use the fact that we put that EID in to maybe capture some carcass value, some carcass knowledge, some feedlot knowledge on the end. So could you give us your perspective of where the traceability conversation is at present as you see it?
I think it's becoming more present, and John can maybe speak to this with just some of the recent activities, some of the big lot sales they've had with interest from our buyers from the north. To send a calf across the border, it needs an 840 EID tag. And 15 years ago, if you would have sat down in a group of people saying, you're going to need to put an electronic ID tag in your ear, they would have run you out of the room with a pitchfork. And now people, I think, have gotten past that and are understanding and seeing the merit and benefit in placing that ID in the calf at branding or at weaning, to have access to some of those markets, because we've heard many people talk about it. Mike's alluded to it, and John does a great job at the sale by announcing and reading the information off that folks have. But there's a variety of process verified programs from virtually all of the breeds. Many of the vaccine manufacturers have them that help validate what the producers are doing to present that spreadsheet of information, and it's definitely a real tool right now in terms of cattle that may be exported out of the country. That's for you to talk about. That's all you, John.
I'm dead. So
I guess you can keep going, John.
So, as you kind of comment on that, talk to us a little bit. You mentioned the 840 tags. There's also 900 series tags and those sort of things. You all being close to a border dictates maybe some things that others don't have. How many cattle do you see come through your facility that have any sort of EID whatsoever?
Probably 95% of the Holstein, the dairy cull cows, probably 95% of them, if not more, have the EID tag. The dairy industry has, I guess, seems to place more emphasis on individual production than, like I think in the beef industry, we're more lot oriented as opposed to individual. As far as feeder calves and things like this, or for sure bred cows or cull cows on the beef side of it, I'm going to say, man, less than 2%. It's just not done. That is something, the buyers from the north, if they buy cattle, they're required to not have any EID. It has to be an 840 tag, and we actually charge them to put those tags in them, and then they can cross the border.
Anybody else have comments on that component? Okay. Questions, thought processes at all? Oh. You better have the mic, because this is going to be serious.
One of the questions I have, do we have enough feeder capacity to meet the requirements for our kill plants in Washington State?
No.
Mike, you better take that.
No. So if we filled every feedlot in the Northwest year-round, there's not enough to run these 2 kill plants. So that's why it's kind of a irony that there is some rancor towards a Canadian fat animal rolling down here to our local kill plants. We need them to keep those two plants running efficiently, and if they don't run efficiently, they won't be here. Believe me, they'll turn the lights off and go somewhere else. It's kind of like a feedlot, you know, you need to have numbers. Your overhead is your overhead, you need to have numbers. Sometimes it goes the other way. I mean, we've bought plenty of feeders out of Canada in the past, but guess what? The Canadians are making the feeder market down here now. So it's not only a national market, it's an international market. And the Northwest is a little tiny space in the national beef cow industry. And we need the Canadians on both sides, both the feeders and the kill, to keep our industry as viable as it is. I think our markets for your calves are very competitive nationwide, but the only reason they are is because there is 2 kill plants here, and the only reason those 2 kill plants can run efficiently is because they at times can access Canadian fats. So without getting political, without getting anybody's face, I don't think there's any need to feel uncomfortable with those cattle being killed at our 2 kill plants.
The other question is, a lot of cattle from the Northwest go to the Midwest. And the pricing oftentimes is competitive to what's out here. And if we're bringing cattle from Canada, what are the dynamics that allow that to happen? I mean, are they just needing more cattle? Are the Northwest cattle maybe do a little better? It's on average, or?
I mean, that changes, that dynamic totally changes. In the past, as I say, we've been buying Canadian feeders, and we probably were upsetting the feedlot owners up there. Like me as a feedlot owner now is going, what is that Canadian thinking? He's blowing my brains out. I can't compete with that. But guess what? It's supply and demand, and it's the best economic system in the world. And at times, the Midwest boys are going to come out here and blow my socks off. At times, the Canadians are doing it now. Other times, I'm going to make the market. We're connected enough now to where we're not the isolated little spot we used to be. You're going to find your best value wherever you are now, but you're going to have to realize that sometimes those cattle will be bought and shipped away, and other times they'll be fed here. We've got a very aggressive feedlot industry in the Northwest for the size of it, you know. We're not sitting on our hands waiting for the bargain. As a group, very competitive. We all got egos, and it just takes 2 guys to make that calf bring all he can, and it happens every week.
So,
Maybe one other follow-up to Mike's point. As you look, Canada is a top 3, top 5 international export customer for U.S. beef. And one of the big things, it's the trade with Canada is shaped like a horseshoe. And where we are in the Pacific Northwest, we see the live cattle come in, whether they're feeder cattle going to Mike's lot or fed cattle that are headed to Toppenish or Pasco. And in many situations, those cattle that might have started out here that got fed in the Midwest, or cattle finished in the Midwest, will get exported in boxes with export to Eastern Canada. So in many cases, our U.S. beef is serving the masses of Canada on their East Coast, and where they've got the cattle on the West, we see the live cattle down here.
Sure. The first thing I would mention is we struggle to sell cattle in loads less than 50,000 pounds. Our specialty is load lots, marketing big strings of feeder cattle. And to take that one step further, they have to be set up from a vaccination standpoint with a robust vaccination protocol, or my buyers at the other end really struggle with them, just like you guys had mentioned earlier. you know, the example that I think of is if I don't wean my calves and I don't vaccinate my calves, that would be like the foremans going to their 3 largest bull buyers, because the main feeders in this country don't want to buy balling calves if they don't have to. They'd rather buy cattle with less risk in them, right? And so that would be like the foreman saying, I'm going to have a bull sale, but you were my volume buyer last year, and you can't buy the best 3 bulls that I have. I mean, it'd be the same thing. You need to set the cattle up for success. And that's, if you can set them up with a robust vaccination protocol and there's a load lot, there's a good chance we can work together. Does that help? Yeah, Rob.
Since I went to get it, I'll let you use it.
It's working. So Chip and I had this conversation a little bit earlier that I've never been able to win a popularity contest, and that's probably not going to start today either. But we've been big advocates of health.
Sure.
And it's not for the reason I do not sell one drop of pharmaceuticals, so it has nothing to do with that.
But he's wearing a Zoetis jacket.
I am. Yeah, you know how much this costs, right? But we've been big advocates of that as an industry thing. Kind of to Mike's point earlier, whether we like to think that we are, we're all in this together. So the question I would have, and I know this is a bit of a zinger, there are the guys that will make the investment, will make the effort. Maybe they have the facilities and they'll do the weaning, and I don't know if that's part of the issue sometimes why there's so many ball and calves sent to John is he's got an awesome set of corrals down there and can deal with them, and maybe I don't. But it seems that we hear a lot that although people are willing to pay and recognize the differentiation, we're not always sure, and I think, John, you alluded to that, we're not always sure that we hear about it from our producers. So I'd be interested what you guys have to say in regard to that.
So we have the 2 most popular vaccination protocols we have would be the one that's VAC 34, which would mean you'd vaccinate your calves in the fall 3 to 4 weeks before you ship them, and that comes with a modified live with a pastorelle in it and some kind of 7-way. And that would be what we would consider somewhat of a base. I mean, I don't sell any cattle anywhere in the country with less than a VAC 34 protocol. And the other would be what we call VAC 45, which is, it sets the cattle up to never need another vaccination again, hopefully. And that's 2 rounds of modified live, 2 rounds of a 7-way, and that's at weaning and booster per label on the drug. And then, of course, they need to be weaned for 45 days. And the difference in those, that if you wean the cattle, our data showed last year in 2017, we get you $5, almost $6 a hundredweight. If you did a bad job, if the cattle didn't gain weight in the 45 days that you weaned them. But a 7-weight balling calf to a 7-weight weaned calf, the difference was almost $6 a hundredweight. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen a weaning scenario where the cattle didn't gain at least some weight. And so not only do you get the advantage of selling a more robust calf from a health standpoint, but you also get the advantage of selling some weight that likely didn't cost you, in this market, likely didn't cost you $1.50 a pound to put it on. But that's what you're going to sell it at. Or not, I mean, that's obviously just a number.
Well, I guess our experience, and we've experienced it for years now, is, and I've actually had feedlot buyers tell me this, is I'm not necessarily going to be popular with our friends at the pharmaceutical companies either, but actually we wish you'd give them no shots so that we could just start from scratch. I mean, because how does Mike handle a set of calves? He's got 1 set of weaned calves. Okay, that's fine. There was 15 in that group, and they had double vaccinations of they had the Nasaldin, the 1 shot, and the Bova Shield at pre-weaning. Okay, and then the next really nice quality set of calves were 12-headed calves had no shots. They gave them an 8-way at branding, and they were very nice quality calves, and you bought them. And the next set of calves, maybe had the virus shield twice. And so I'm not a feedlot guy. I've not processed cattle, but I think all three of those sets of calves you'd rather treat differently. And so therefore, we do not see the premiums at Toppenish for calves that have had 10 shots or 0 shots, generally speaking, especially in the small consignment. So when you have your 60 head of calves and you put them on the truck and you haul them to Toppenish and we sex them, and now you got 30 steers and they come in 3 sorts. You've got 5 light ones, you got 15 in the middle, and you've got 10 big ones. And they go 3 different ways. There's no way for the buyers to be able to say, I'm going to give a premium for them because they're going to get commingled with all them other calves I'm buying. And frankly, I'm just starting out from scratch. And so that's why we don't see a premium like you are when you've got, now we're going to have a video, we're going to have a sale here a week from Tuesday night. We've got one customer who's got 700 and some calves on the video. He's going to have 3 loads of big steers, he's going to have 3 loads of big heifers, he's going to have a load of medium steers and a load of light heifers, and that's what we're going to offer. Now, those cattle will bring a premium on account of his robust vaccination program and things. Now, there'll be balling calves, but it'll be a very fair weighing condition, the delivery conditions he'll have. So now they will bring a premium to what we get done on Tuesday night. But generally speaking, in our world, when we've got 2,000 calves from 40 consigners, you just don't see the premiums, and for that reason.
So I started out buying calves myself, hauling them home myself, riding pins the next day. I know when I make a mistake when you do it that way. You bought the calf, felt like it was a value, you get it home, he falls apart. So I'm going to counter a little bit what John said. Even if it's 12 head, and I know that those 12, and I'm sitting in the ring or my buyer's sitting in the ring, I know those calves have had a proper vaccination program, I will pay more for them. And if I don't keep them separate out of convenience, then I don't. But even if I have to revax them because I've bought multiple commingled sources, I'm paying more for that 12 head that I can verify were processed, even though I'm going to have to reprocess them again because they're mixed, because they're not going to fall apart on me, whereas it's a roll of dice on anything that you don't know about. So I'll counter that a little bit. I will give more. If you ask me how to verify that, I can't, but I'm trying to get a value in the sale yard, but I'm trying to not have a headache at home, and I'd rather pay a little more for something I know is properly vaccinated, because the headache at home is a lot more expensive than the 2 cents in the sale.
Any comments, questions? We're starting to broach our time, and so that's a very interesting conversation across the panel, different perspectives and different thoughts. Certainly nationally, I would say that the more health you have in them, clearly that's the better. But certainly there are some regional situations. I would suggest that even though the Northwest is clearly farther from the Midwest, that is an obvious statement, I wouldn't necessarily assume that in terms of lot size, you're distinctly different from a lot of portions in the Midwest. Missouri, for example, where this hillbilly calls home, is the densest cow population in the Union, 25 cows to every square mile. And even still, the average herd's a little over 30. And so if they're selling steers, they're selling, some number of teens. So again, I think that is a common phenomenon that we have throughout the country. Obviously, there are regions where there are lots of large groups where Rocky calls home. He's going to see lots of large groups in the upper plains in that region. But even still, there are some small herds in those areas that are going to be contended with. And so as we wrap this up, I think we're getting close. Any last comments, any of the four? One other thing before I give you all a shot. There's a number of young folks in here. I like that. And I guess when I was a young person, if I could have had a chance to ask one of you all a question, I may not have had the guts to take it, but damn, I wish I had now. And so I would say, any of the young folks want to fire a question, one of these people? Look at that. I like a lady who'll step up. Would you hand her this microphone?
So this is, thanks, Jack. Okay, so this is kind of directed to Jack, John, and I can't remember your name, I'm sorry. Is there any actual cash value return if you're having us smaller producers have the EID tags? I know that there's a lot of traceability. I know that there's a lot of value to the carcass side, but for the cow-calf operator, is there enough value return to start doing it?
the tag costs $2.35. The opportunity to sell that calf to a customer north of the border, if it's not tagged, John can't put it on a truck and ship it. Right now in Washington State, they are moving towards eliminating the metal clip and making that option available for all of us, regardless of vaccinating one heifer or 1,000 head. You can use your 840 tag to identify those heifer calves. So essentially, over a short period of time, you could have 100% EID'd through your commercial cow herd for your own management. On your steers, if you, again, as we had talked earlier about exporting your cattle, or if you're going to participate in any of the process verified programs, they all require official identification. So unless you're willing to be a price taker, I think myself personally, the EID tag is the only thing you can use to get yourself to the next level and participate in some of the processes that may bring you more money.
Yeah, I think as it is now, I don't think there's a value return on it for a small producer. I think, you know, since it's not a large investment, I wouldn't discourage it, but, you know, because you're just, I mean, the day's going to come when everybody's going to have their calf's going to have an EID tag in his ear. So you're just going to be ahead of the game. I would recommend continuing to do it, but no, when you bring the calves down to the sale, they're not getting you an extra $2-3 a head or more. In fact, as I think about it, I got a hunch that if the Canadian buyer bought your calves, I'd probably have to cut yours out and put a new one in that was in series to suit the state government, and maybe, I don't know, it's usually not the Canadian government that gives us trouble.
Yeah, if it's an 840, you should be fine.
I'll just have to read it, all the numbers, and write it on, and enter it into the thing. Okay, so that, I'm not sure what's easier or quicker. We might cut it out.
And we all are going to end up EID in our cattle. We have to get all the potential markets, whether it's a non-hormone market, a Chinese market. Canadians are well ahead of us in that regard. They have a greater opportunity for exports, and we're going to have to do it, whether we like it or not. And the only return that you can put your hat on is if you collect the data and you use it to manage your herd. That's the only return at this point. But we all are going to get there, and if you're someone who's trying to do the best at home with your herd, it's information that will be helpful to you.
I think Mike makes a great point as I'm walking to you, is a lot of times we're looking for the premiums associated with these things. I think we're quickly moving to a market where some of these things are less about premiums.
If you buy an EID tag just for your own management, you can go to any one of your animal pharmaceutical distributors and get what would be just referred to as a 982 tag. That's the All-Flex prefix. You can get them from all the manufacturers. You can still use that for your management, but in regards to the state and traceability, those are an 840 tag, and you would have that issued to you through the state vet's office. And that generally takes about a day's time. If you're not set up with your contact information with the state, you'll have to get that set up before you can get 840 tags.
Now, again, you all have some unique circumstances with the border and the 840s. Now, certainly 900 series tags, if they're in the right databases, certainly can qualify from a traceability standpoint for the government. There's a lot of these databases that are that collaborate and cooperate when the government needs this data. Most of them are more of a voluntary situation where, for example, I'll just speak about IMI, for example. IMI, what they would do is if the government said, hey, we would like to check the route this creature has followed, what they would do is the state vet involved in that particular conversation would reach to IMI. IMI would call you, say, hey, we have a request to share information about your animal. Are you comfortable with that? For most of the time, this would be about serious disease traceability. If you're working with an entity like that, you're probably like, hey, yeah, we need to figure this out pretty fast. And so there are two different approaches. The 840 is going to immediately, it's an open book. That's the way it's designed. And there's certainly some good to that. The 900 series, for those that are stored in certain databases, can still be used in traceability efforts. They just are, the databases are handled a little different, typically either by a state itself or by mooring this. The 900 series would be more private companies have that data. So this is going to be the last question because these men have done a yeoman's effort, so it would seem to be fitting that you can do it.
So John's probably not going to let me drive in the yard here next time. I'm just curious real quickly, and I don't want to get too drawn out with it, but what your guys' position is with the latest talk with our brand department. I know it's specific to us here, but most of our crowd that we're dealing with is here. So, and how that relates to the possibility of using the EID as a component of that, and what your guys' thoughts are.
What's your question? So at the end of the day, we're talking about a $1.1 million revenue shortfall. So the Department of Agriculture has dug a hole that will take $1.1 million to get us back to broke. We have to have a conversation whether or not we're willing, how much is brand inspection worth to each of you is a question you have to ask. And then we all have to get a consensus from cattle feeders, cow-calf, dairy, sale yard operators, processors, and we all have to huddle around a decision saying we're willing to raise our fees to a new level. The hourly rate is $17. The current cost to put an inspector in the field is $44. The total cost of the program is $77 an hour. The solution that had been battered out there was to eliminate the certified feedlot program and raise the per head fee on every inspection to $3.13 per head. That, to me, seems like a little steep based on the fact that here 2 years ago we had a knockdown, drag out on trying to put 50 cents into the beef checkoff. Granted, those are two different things, but we're talking about potentially tripling the brand inspection fees. That's up to every individual to find out where their breaking point is. I know the Washington cattle feeders, and Mike can speak to this, are not necessarily willing to write a blank check. We fully understand and see the value of the brand and understand the role it plays. I think it's important that every segment that utilizes the system covers the costs associated with the services they receive.
Mike, you want to touch that?
It's like the dairy industry. They're way ahead of us in regards to individual identification. Something happens, they know the production value of that animal. Something happens from a health standpoint, they know the history of that animal. They don't use brands. Brands in my lifetime have largely been something I have to deal with myself between a neighbor. When I've called a brand inspector, he says you got to call a sheriff. You call a sheriff, he says you got to call a brand inspector. If you can't work it out yourself, you're probably stuck. So if you have, and whether we like it or not, we're going to EID. To market our cattle internationally, we're going to EID. For national traceability of disease, we're going to EID. Those two are duplicitous. If you have EID, you do not need brand. And if you have brand, I think it's an inefficient way to protect your ownership. You got a bad neighbor, you got a bad neighbor. You got to police it yourself. That's my 2 cents.
There you go. Tell you what, that takes a lot of guts. These guys have addressed some pretty tough issues, have been pretty candid and pretty open. Would you give them a nice hand for us, please? We'll let them go rest.